so we're going to talk about 6 value ranges. Okay. And I'm sure you can do more. I'm sure you can do less, like an abbreviated version of that. But we're going to go over 6 main ones. Okay. Now, just because I'm telling you a certain terminology for these doesn't mean that they couldn't be called something else, but these are the 6 you want to kind of pick up on. I would, if I were you, draw a circle, okay, to the best of your ability, and then draw what we call a cast shadow at the bottom. So this is basically a circle or a sphere, which we're going to make it on a table, okay, and that's the tabletop. And then I'm showing you a light that is coming from this way. It's kind of like top right corner, okay, slightly forward. So you don't want it to be directly on the side of that sphere, it would be slightly forward, okay? Now, when you're drawing these little ranges, I'm gonna just change colors so you guys can see what I'm talking about, but I'm gonna draw one little circle here, okay? And then I'll draw a line that goes across like that. And you just mimic what I'm doing, okay? And then I'm gonna go ahead and do some hatch lines. They kind of just go this way. This shows the value on this side. I'm gonna do some more hash lines down here. And then I'm gonna do some cross-hatching lines going around right here. Some scribbly lines that kind of go around that sphere. And then I'm gonna do little dots in this part right here. Okay, so if you have that, that's just gonna be kind of our foundation, and I'll show you what this all means. I'll give you a minute to kind of record that down. You're taking notes. Okay, so the first one right here, that's going to be called our high light. That is the area highest to the light, closest to the light. Okay, so typically on an item that, let's say, if you're looking at a sphere, in this case, it would be that shiny spot. Okay. And if you have a light that is not necessarily, if this is the sphere, it's not going to be directly on the side, it's going to be kind of forward at it like that, then your highlight won't be on the edge of the sphere because the light is pulling forward and kind of pushing it that way. So just keep in mind the direction of our light is on the top right, but slightly forward. Okay, so that's going to be the highlight. Okay, so that's number 1, highlight. Number 2, this whole area over here, I'm just going to write it over here, is going to be called light mass. Light mass, okay? Now, when you look at this entire drawing and you divide it up, what we're actually seeing is light and dark, correct? So when you see a sphere, you're seeing the area that is in light and you're seeing the area that is in shadow, okay? So if, remember, this is light mass, okay, which is what I'll just say LM over here. Okay, so this is light mass. And over here, opposite of that is going to be shadow mass. I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. But when you want to abbreviate value, which means squint and see something simplified, you're going to just see the light mass and the shadow mass. Within the light mass, you have the highlight. I'm just writing highlight. So within the light mass, you have the highlight. Within the light mass, you have a highlight, just to be clear. Okay. All right, so now this whole area down here, as I mentioned here, is called the shadow mass. So what I like to do is just kind of take this area and call it shadow mass, okay? So 3 shadow mass. Why am I splitting it up? Because there's a darker ring that goes around it, but technically this entire area, as I mentioned here, is all the shadow mass, okay? There's another area here that is called core shadow. That's that ring of darkness. So if I were to go back with my highlighter like this and just go a little darker, okay, that's the core shadow. So I'm going to make that number 4, core shadow. What a core shadow is if you think about it, I'll just kind of illustrate with my hands so you see my hand. If this is a sphere, the area that gets the furthest away from the light before it turns back under, that's going to be the core shadow. So you can kind of think about the light hitting here, and then we're going to shadow mass, and then as it gets the furthest away from the light before it curves back under, that's called a core shadow. You'll see it on an arm as well. You'll see it on a cheek. You'll see it on anything. All these values you're going to see on anything that you're drawing. okay? And so that's why we typically use a sphere to help illustrate that. So core shadow, okay? And then you have this little area down here. I can kind of illustrate it by just doing another little circle or semicircle, kind of this little part right here, okay? That little area is going to be called the reflected light. So I don't want you to be confused with that line right there. I'm going to pull this one and call it reflected light. We're going to make this number 5, reflected light. Okay. Now what reflected light is basically a bounce back light, if you've heard of that term before. So using an analogy, you can also reflect or bounce back color. So think about a sphere, think about a white sphere sitting on a red table. Do you think the bottom of that white sphere would have some of that red reflecting back into it? Yes, right? So that's the reflected color, but it's also could be a reflected light. It's basically the light coming down, hitting the table and bouncing back underneath. Okay, so it's a reflected light. And then the last one, which is here, which I touched upon already, we'll make it 6, is going to be called the cast shadow. Okay, because what we're trying to identify here is the light coming down and hitting the sphere and casting the shadow. That's what we're looking at. So if I did this correctly, this little ring right here would not start until my yellow line hit. It'd be more like this. Okay, just to be clear. So that's the cast shadow. It's the light is hitting here. Everywhere where the sphere turns away from the light turns into shadow mass. The light comes and bounces back on the table and then comes back underneath the sphere, which is the reflected light, and then it's casting a shadow, okay? Same thing if I put my hand here, you can kind of see my cast shadow on the actual paper. It's just very subtle because the light is so far away, but you can see a little bit of shadow mass on there. And if I set something up here, you can see a little bit of cast shadow coming from this marker going this way, okay? The more I put a light closer to it, I'm just gonna turn on my phone real quick and flashlight. And if I turn off this one, okay, so now you can see everything there. You can see the cast shadow. Now keep in mind with the cast shadow, the further away it goes, so as this cast shadow moves away like that, if I put this over here, as it moves away from the object, it gets softer, okay? So let's do this, you guys can see it. Okay, stay, go. Okay, as the cast shadow moves away from the object, the edge gets softer. If the cast shadow is closer to the object, the edge of it is more crisp, okay? You'll also notice that the cast shadow is darker closest to the object, and as it moves away, it gets lighter. And that goes for anything. If I put like a pop figure here, okay, same thing. You can see her cast shadow is darker and more crisp where she is. And then as it moves away from her, it gets softer and lighter. And if I move this light away, then the cast shadow will get lighter because the light is going further away from the pop, okay? So if I bring it closer, if I put it here, you can't really see that, but if I put it right on top, the ring's just gonna be right around her. I'll be blocking it if I do that. And so depending on where you're putting that, see the highlight on her forehead, or her head right there? That's the highlight, okay? So then you're seeing the light mass, that little shine right there is the highlight. You're seeing the shadow mass here. And then if you look really hard, you're gonna see a little ring. Let's see, I'm on the wrong side. It happens over here somewhere on her head. It's a little darker, okay? So that's gonna be your core shadow. So depending on how I place this, you'll see that, okay? So the cast shadow just depends on where the light is, just so you understand, okay? Same thing if it's here. Her cast shadow just depends on where that light is, okay? So I just wanna clarify that. I'm gonna turn it back around and turn back on my light so you guys get a little bit more light. Okay, so as I mentioned before, cast shadow, I'm just gonna get another color. Right here, you're gonna have a dark cast shadow with a hard edge. Okay, over here, you're gonna have a light cast shadow with a soft edge. And those are the 6 terms that you want to try to remember when it comes to value, and it'll apply to anything. If I put a light on my hand, you'll see the same thing repeated. You just have to look for the highlight, light mass, or shadow, all these terms that I mentioned. Now, just to be clear, not everything will have a highlight. There are some things that absorb light, okay? So I'll give you another example. Unless I have like a lot of grease on myself, I'm not gonna show too much of a highlight. You can see a little bit, but it's not as strong as something that would be metal. You're not seeing too much of it. So if I take something like this, Now you're seeing that strong light reflecting on it like there. So if you have something that's more metallic or something that's more glass-like, you're going to see very strong highlights. But if you have something like, you know, maybe this, that's also, you know, just there's not much highlight that you're seeing on there, but if it's glossy, you're going to see that highlight. So if you see the surface quality of it, if it's glossy, you're picking up on some of those highlights. It depends on the surface that you're working on is what I want to tell you. Is if you have something matte, like a plaster cast, you're not going to get too much of a highlight. But if you have something metal, you will, okay? Now, when it comes to terms, there's one more term I want you to keep in mind, and I'm just going to put it in pink. This line is really important, okay? Which would also be this one right here. That one is called the Terminator. Think of the movie Terminator. Okay? So that one's called the Terminator. Okay? Those pink lines are called the Terminator. The Terminator just means that's the edge in which it goes from light to dark. So that's where it just transitions from light to dark. Now there's two things to keep in mind, okay? You're gonna have two different types of Terminators, always. You'll have soft edges and you'll have hard edges, but it depends on what you're working on, okay? So if you have anything that is cylindrical, like a cylinder, or a sphere, you'll always have soft Terminators. That means that when you shade the value on here, that Terminator, which would be this line that kind of comes down the center, would be a soft transition. Same thing with the sphere, like a cheek or an arm, you're always going to have these soft transitions. Okay? But if you have something that's more mechanical, geometrical, like a cube, something like this, okay, you're going to have hard Terminators. If the light is coming, let's say from here, you'll have the light be up here, and then this may be a medium value, and this may be the darker value. But you'll notice there's no soft transitions. It's one edge against another. Same thing, let's say when it comes to a pyramid, okay, a little bit more geometrical this way. If your light is coming this way, you may have this be the light side and this is the dark side, but you're not having a soft transition because you're seeing these corners. So anything that has this corner like that, you're not going to see a soft edge. You're going to see a hard edge. That doesn't mean that this side couldn't have a gradation on it. I know it's pretty far, but what I'm saying is if I zoom into this and I draw it big, that's kind of cheesy, but you get the point, okay? Let's say this whole side was dark, okay? That means that this edge right here is a hard Terminator. But at the same time, if the light is coming in this way, sometimes what will happen is this will be the lightest area, and then as it moves away from the lighter area, it gets a little darker. And so you have what we call a gradation. So then it goes like a little, it's still the light mass, okay? But you'll see a little bit of value on this side, and then it'll just transition to the white of the paper over here. I know that's also hard to see because I'll just pull it up. So you can kind of see my chicken scratch, okay? So it'll get a little darker over here and then pull over. But that doesn't mean you're looking at a soft Terminator. You're still looking at a hard Terminator. So again, anything that is cylindrical or spherical will give you a soft edge, and anything that is geometrical will give you a hard edge, okay? So just keep those things in mind. I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna come back to my screen, but this is what you wanna remember, okay? I'm gonna come back to my screen so you can see me, and then I'm gonna share my screen in terms of value so you can understand that a little bit more. Let me share this and go here. So I've already kind of pre-sketched some of this out, but I'm gonna pull this open. And this is already uploaded online as well, but you have your sphere here, okay? I'm gonna do some annotations on here so you can identify where everything is. And so we have this little area right here that you can barely see. That's my highlight, okay? So that's gonna be the area closest to the light. I'm just reviewing, highlight. All right, now remember, it's soft Terminators. So the difference between a highlight and a light mass is a soft edge. Okay, so the difference between here and here is a soft edge, soft edge, soft edge. All of these are soft edges. But when you end the entire thing, you have a hard edge because it's the edge of the item. Okay, so let me just undo these marks right here. All right, so we've got the highlight, and then you can see right here, squint at it and make it blurry. Squint your eyes and make it blurry. You're gonna see the Terminator go somewhere along here. You guys see that? Okay, when you're squinting, you can see that? So that's what I said, when you're looking at it and you squint, you should only see this darkness here, and then obviously the cast shadow darkness. Okay, so all this would blend into like one darkness here, all right? So this one, as I mentioned before, is going to be the light mass. Light mass, okay? Now remember, those two group together. So all this is one section, okay? The light mass is the main part, and in the light mass, you have a highlight, all right? The other section is here. All of this is considered shadow mass, all of it. And there's a reason why I'm pointing all this out, okay? Now going back to kind of labeling things, if you look at this, it's kind of hard to see on this image with the photograph, but there should be a ring that's a little darker right here. It's kind of hard to see it in photograph very well. Graphite's hard to take a picture of. That's going to be the core shadow. I'm just going to put core S, okay? All of this bottom part here that I mentioned is shadow mass. Shadow mass. Do you see this area down here that gets lighter? That's reflected light. Reflected L, okay? And then you can see my cast shadow. Cast shadow, okay? You can also see my edges are dark and crisp here, and then here it gets lighter and fades out, okay? That's what you're working on. This is what I want you to create, okay? Now the reason why I put this in red and blue, so you could understand, hey, all of this is shadow, like all of this shadow mass contains the core shadow reflected light. So the core shadow is part of the shadow mass, reflected light is part of the shadow mass, and cast shadow is part of the shadow mass, okay? And then on this one, like I mentioned, highlight's part of the light mass. Why is that important? Because what I've noticed is that people take this little reflected light and they try to make it the same value as this area here. And that can never happen. You can never have your reflected light be as light as your light mass. Why? Because it's in the shadow mass. It is only a bounce back light. It is not a directed light source. It's only a secondary bounce back light. It's not the actual light source, okay? So that will never be as light as your light mass. So I wanted to clarify, hey, make sure your reflected light stays in the shadow. So when I see people shading stuff, sometimes this is what they do, and I want to make sure you guys don't fall into the same problem, okay? They have a sphere, and then they save this area, like they don't shade it at all, and then they shade the mass. That's why I'm telling you now, don't do that, because you should actually shade the entire thing and then push darker in this area. Because if you don't shade this area down here, then it will become as light as this, and you don't want that to happen. The only way to separate your cast shadow over here from your core shadow over here is by having this reflected light. And that's why it's important to identify that. You'll notice that on items, when you start putting lights on things, you'll notice that this reflected light is the separation of your sphere. It's the end of your sphere. So if I didn't have that and I just shaded all this down to the bottom with the same darkness, I wouldn't have an edge. One thing you'll also notice when it comes to doing a value drawing is you got to get rid of your lines. Lines no longer exist. Lines are just your guide, and then you get rid of them. So in other words, if I had drawn a line here, I need to either get rid of that line by drawing it darker on the left or by drawing it darker on the right. You choose. Any line you draw, it's either going to be a dark and then a light. Always. There's a line here, you'll have a dark and you'll have a light. There's a line here, you'll have a dark and you'll have a light. Always. If you have a dark and a dark, you have no edge. If you have a light and a light, you have no edge. So what you'll have to learn is once you draw a line, how can you get rid of it? By putting something that is darker and putting something lighter. It could be super, super, super light, but it still has to be something there, right? So this is the paper here that you're seeing. And this is a very light value of graphite here. There's no line anymore, okay? Now, the reason why we worked on line weight variation is because you need to learn how to use different weights of a line. And if that was a struggle for you, getting into shading may also be a struggle. Why is it important to learn how to manipulate a dark line, like here, and learn how to manipulate a light line here? If I had drawn a dark line here, let's say it was black, like a pen, okay? Then I would have to shade this tabletop black. That's what that means. But if I want to keep this tabletop as light as I did it here, then I have to draw a very light line because it has to disintegrate into my shading. You guys get what I'm saying? So you got to make sure that your lines are, you're working your lines accordingly. That's why we say when you sketch it out, keep everything light. And if you keep everything light, you can just turn it into whatever value you want. Okay, so that's the first, that's an example of the finished sphere. Yes, sphere. Yeah, I said that right. Okay, I'm like, came out wrong. All right, so here's another one that I want to show you. This is my little setup tutorial. So let me just kind of show you the half version of it. And this is uploaded on Canvas already. this is showing you what all those terms are and how they apply. And I've done half of a sphere on here so you can see it. So what you're going to be doing is the whole sphere, okay? I've just given you half. You're going to do the whole thing. So I just told you right here, I've done a half, you do the whole. You're going to put a background behind it and you have to fade out that background without a halo. What's a halo? A halo is when you have a sphere like this and you have the tabletop, okay? And your shading in the background literally looks like a halo, like you've only shaded it that far. So what I'm telling you is you got to fade out that background so that we don't actually see an edge. Okay, so that's one thing, okay? You'll see here you want to try to get rid of the line. You can kind of see my line there. I'd have to shade a little bit more right next to that line to try to get rid of it as I move out, okay? You can kind of see one here. I'd have to shade here and pull it inside to get rid of that line. And your value is always going to juxtapose itself. So if it's light here, like I mentioned, you go dark here. But if your sphere goes dark here, like it will, you're going to have to go light here. And in between has to be a subtle gradation. It has to be a subtle transition between light and dark. It's not just a line where you've gone dark and then you decided to go light, okay? So what I'm showing you here again is this little area. You can't see the dots on this side, but you can see where I'm showing you on this side. That's my highlight. So I put a number 1, okay? And then if I clear this out, you can see where my light mass is 2. So I'm writing it down for you. My Terminator, I put as a 3, and I said it's soft. So my transitioning between my light mass and shadow mass, I put it at a 3, okay? My shadow mass, I have it a 4. And when I'm telling you these numbers, what I'm correlating this to is a value scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, okay? 1 is going to be the paper. That's the lightest light. So then you have 2, 3, that's 1, okay? 4, 5, 6, and 7, that's going to be your darkest dark, okay? So I'm correlating this to my value scale. 1 is the paper, okay? 2, which is my light mass, is going to be this value that you're putting here. 3, which is my transition, is this value here. It's not necessarily just numbering. I'm actually correlating them together, okay? 4 for my shadow mask, this whole area down here will be this value over here, okay? When I need to go darker, I'll put that right here, okay? 5 for the core shadow. And then the shadow mask, sorry, is 4, okay? So I got 5. Then 6 and 7 are here, but remember 7 goes closer to the sphere because it's darker, and then it goes to a 6. So I put 7 and then 6. So there's my 7 and then my 6, which will be this value and this value, okay? Remember that you want to put a ground plane, which is basically your tabletop, without having a line. So you'll need to fade that out, that you can see the line pick up on this side. So this whole side is just direction, and this whole side is what it should look like, just to be clear on that, okay? If you go to the next picture on canvas, you're going to see the other half of this, which is this part, which is my value scale. And I've given you half of a value scale because it takes too long to shade everything just for me to demo it. So what you're going to do is when you set this up, you're going to do it right in your sketchbook. So you don't need a big 18 by 24 paper, just write a note, write in your sketchbook. And you're going to draw out a 7-inch line and then a 1-inch line. And so each one of these will be a 1 by 1. Because if you take 1 times 7, it's 7. Okay, so you have a 1 by 1 square as you go across. And then you're going to use, what you could do is put a piece of artist tape right here along this border. And then you could put another piece of artist tape around this border. And then as you shade, you could hit that tape as you shade so that you don't go all the way past the line, if that makes sense. It's like a guide for you. Or you could just be neat and keep it in the line, okay? Your number 1 is going to be your paper, so you don't do anything. This is nothing. Don't put anything there, okay? Number 2 is a very light value of an F or an HB pencil. Super, super light, should look like that, okay? Your jumps between should be very subtle. If you had this number 1 and your number 2 looked like this, you'd have a problem. So you gotta make sure your transitions are there, okay? As you go into 3, I said you're gonna use it, let's just say F, okay? If you have an HB, that's fine, but I'm just gonna say F, okay? You're gonna use a little bit more of an F, so I just put F plus. When you go to the next one, you're gonna use a little bit more, F plus plus. So that just means you're layering it more. And you're cross-hatching, going different directions to get that down, okay? You go to the next one, that's when you're gonna start adding pencils. You're gonna take your value number 4, which was F++, which is what you see here, and you're gonna add a 2B to it to get darker, okay? Now you're gonna take, again, your value number 4, which is here, and you're gonna add more 2B. Technically, you're taking your value number 5 and adding more 2B, if that makes sense, okay? And then again, I said F++, which is a 4, which is technically still 6 and then adding more. Okay, so we got a F plus a 2B plus, which means more 2B, which was that one. Okay, and then adding a 4B. These are just the value scales of the pencil. So it says on here, your value scale should have at least 7 different values. Number 1 is still included as a value, even though you're not putting anything because it's the paper. Okay. Make sure that you're not doing a gradation within the value scale, which means like within each square. So this is 1 by 1 square. When you shade this one, what people have a tendency to do is go darker here, and then they start to lighten up as they go across. And then they go darker here, and they start to lighten up as they go across. And the reason why I'm saying don't do that, because then it's always going to look like a transition to you. Because this will always look like it's different from that one. But that's not a true value scale. You can't just go darker on the left side and transition to a light as you go across. The whole square has to represent that entire value. So like I said, I've only given you half of it, but you can see I'm filling the whole square. It's not that I went darker here and then it got lighter, okay? The other thing I want to tell you is as you get to your number 7, don't go super, super dark, because as you know, when you go super, super dark with graphite, it gets super, super shiny. So you're not trying to press really hard on this one. You don't want to go like super solid with it. You'll see a little bit of the paper through it, but it'll still be your darkest dark. And you can still see the difference. Now I'm looking at this in a photograph and I can kind of see where it's a little darker here and then it gets a little lighter here. So it's a hard thing to do. And if I squint really hard, I feel like I'm even doing that gradation where it's kind of getting lighter and as it goes to the side. Like I said, it's not easy, okay? Fill the entire 1 by 1 inch. So if this is your square, just an example of a number 2, okay? Don't do this. You need to fill the entire square with that value, which is even harder, okay? Work on cross hatching. So you're gonna go this way, this way, this way. That's what cross hatching is. In this case, we're not gonna lift, okay? So in your mark making assignment, you probably went more like this, like a pound sign where you lifted it up. And graphite, we shade it more like this, where we keep it on the paper and then we turn. And you don't actually lift it up. But that's what you're gonna be doing to get that shading in there. Don't just depend on going one way. So when you shade this, you're not trying to go like that the whole way down. Okay, so you wanna make sure that you're doing that, cross hatching on, and I'll show you here how to do that as well. Okay, so let me clear this all out, close that out. And then the last photo that you're gonna see on here is both of those together so that you can kind of see how they correlate, correspond to each other. So again, just to clarify, when I say that number 1 up here, that's that paper. Okay, number 2 is this value right here. So it's kind of like connect the dots, matching up color kind of thing. That's what we're actually doing here, technically. So I would recommend, if I were you, to start off with your value scale first and then go to your sphere, okay? So that just so you know, okay? Now I'm gonna show you a little bit of how to do this and then we're pretty much done, okay? And then whatever questions you guys have. So I'll go back to my little document camera so you guys can see and then go from there. So we don't need this. So I have 3 pencils here, okay? So what you would do if, let's focus. Come on. Come on. A little bit of focus. Are we focused? I still feel like it's not focused. Maybe if I start drawing, it'll focus. Okay. So if you want to go ahead and sketch out your value scale, you can use a ruler, you can use a T-square. I'm not going to get that picky on it. I said 1 by 1 because I want to make sure you're not making it too small. Okay. And then divide it, try to make it even. Like I said, you could do something like I'm doing, where I'm just kind of eyeballing it where it approximately looks, try to get it to focus on something. There we go, okay. Where it approximately looks like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then obviously I wanna make them approximately the same size, okay? So 7, I don't know where my eraser went. I still think I'm blurry, but hopefully you guys get the point, okay? And then there's one right here too. So then again, leave the paper. When you start shading this, this is how you want to work it. Okay. As you start shading, you're going to hold your pencil way back here. Okay. And again, don't do a 4B, sketching it out. Go to your F, which is your lighter one. Okay. Or an HB. You're going to hold your pencil way back here, and this is how you shade. It's a light pressure, and you can barely see that. And then you teeter-totter it. So you can see me not lifting up the pencil. And the faster you do that, and the more you go over it, the darker that gets. And again, I'm sorry that it's not that focused, but it's also not that dark. And so that's probably why it has nothing to focus on. Okay. I'm going to do it again and I'll go a little darker. So I'm going to take a 2B. I'm going to go this way. And I'm kind of just doing this with the pencil. So it's not actually in my hand. I'm like just holding it here. And I'm just kind of wiggling it like that. And you want to go this way. I'll go slow. And then you want to turn this way without lifting. And then you want to go this way. And then you want to go this way. And then by doing that, what happens is you're able to kind of come down and keep going. Just don't lift it. And keep teeter-tottering it, which means go this way. And then go this way. And then go that way. Okay. That's important because if you decide you want to shade like this, what happens is every time you go to the next spot, you get that overlap. So if you've ever shaded one direction, get it? One direction. If you've ever shaded one direction, sorry, then it always does this little part right here. Okay, I call it stitching, where it just does that overlap. Okay, but if you keep it going different directions like this, even if you press harder, there's never a solid edge. And so it never does that. It's kind of like interlocking like this. So instead of hitting like this and overlapping like that, you're actually interlocking your mark making like that. Okay. So you go this way and you're moving back and forth. Let me pull it out a little bit so you can see my hand. And then I'll bring it over here. And so see, go there. Okay. So now I'm having a little bit more control over it. Before I was doing very light, so I was back here. And then I'll pull it closer and I kind of like put it almost where it's inside my hand right there. And then I'm more kind of like orchestrating like that. I'm still moving my arm, okay? And then I just pull that down. So that's how you're gonna get that nice, clean, soft feel without smudging it. Don't do this one direction like that and then smudge it. Because what that does is it flattens everything out. So the reason why some graphite drawings look flat is because the oil from your hand, you're compressing everything together. So what I'm trying to do is have you draw this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and it makes three-dimensional volume, okay? But if you smudge it, you compress it all together and you lock it like that. So that's not what you want to do. You want to create these layers like this, where you start to see that graphite pull forward like that. That'll be huge because when you get into color, that's what happens. It's the difference when you go like this and you leave some of the paper exposed, and then you decide to go like this and you leave some of the paper exposed. Now, obviously that'll make a purple-ish color, okay, if I put a lot down. But if you keep adding color, you're gonna leave these holes in there. And then the more color you get, the more vibrance you're gonna get because everything is showing, but it's still gonna mix itself. Well, here's what most people do, is they go here and they go solid. And they create one flat layer. And then they go here and they go solid. And so instead of seeing really that pink underneath, you're just kind of covering it every single time, okay? Same thing with graphite. And you can see how you're not seeing all these colors that I put in here and like you can see here. So you get more vibrance out of that and less out of that. So you can see it with highlighters. You can tell what I'm talking about when it comes to graphite. And you can even see it here, how this looks more three-dimensional than that does. Okay, and then I have my sphere. Hold on, grab my sphere. So then I have this sphere here. And this is the same one that I took in the photo. So let's see how close I can get. There we go. If I were to keep working on this to add a core shadow, all I would do is go here and then go like this. So I'm in a 2B right now. You can see how I'm holding it like that. Okay. So I'm actually holding the camera and drawing at the same time. So pardon me if it's a little shaky. But I don't want to go all the way down to the edge because then I lose my reflected light, okay? I also rotate the pencil every once in a while. And if I do something like this, I'll just show you a mistake. So let's say I go here and I go here. Do you guys see that gap in between? So to fix that, instead of going over everything, you just fill the gap. And then go around the area that's dark and fill that gap. And then turn your pencil and make sure you're getting that soft transition. So you can start to see a core shadow come into here that's not on this side. So just by working that, okay? The other thing that I'll show you is instead of doing, there's one more thing that'll happen to your drawing. And let's see if I can show it to you like this. I'm gonna put your paper like that, okay? When you shade, you wanna make sure that your pencil, let's see if I can get it right there, okay? You don't wanna be too down like that, okay? Because then you're drawing more with the side of the pencil. You wanna make sure that you're about a 45-degree angle. And what that'll do is give you a nice cleaner line. So I'll show you the difference here. This is me working more on the side of the pencil. Okay, and this is a 2B. You see how that's fuzzy? But if I take that and I just pull it up a little bit, the line changes the quality. So just watch that as you're working. If you're finding like, why is my shading so like fuzzy like that? And then I'll just pull this closer. If you're finding it get really fuzzy, it's because you're too flat on your pencil. You got to lift it up to get that line, okay? And then it's just doing that and cross-hatching it. So that's going to be that assignment. I'm going to come back on camera so you can see me. Oh. Okay, so just to wrap it up, what you're going to be doing, okay, is finishing up your mark making. So that's number one. Finish up your mark making. Not going to be due until Wednesday by 11:59. So you have plenty of time. If you have questions even on Wednesday, you can ask me about it because it's not due until the evening. Okay, so that's number one. But you can upload it now if you want to. Make sure you're following the criteria with the T-square and then the whole thing and then the top half and the bottom half. There's images on there for you to reference already, okay? When you come into class on Wednesday, I'm gonna kind of briefly touch upon this graphite and how that'll transition into the next assignment, tell you how to set up a still life for your next assignment, and then you're gonna go home and work on that sphere. You're gonna create a 7-step value scale that's approximately 1 by 7 inches. So you have 1 by 1 squares going across, 1 being the paper, 7 being your darkest. And then you're gonna create a sphere at the bottom. The best way to do this sphere, you saw my sphere looked pretty perfect, right? Nice circle, huh? You like that? I'll show you how to do it real quick. So all you're gonna do is, I kind of cheated, just take your roll of tape, okay? Best way to do it, so just take your artist tape. Mine has a little flaw right there, so I'm gonna use this side. Put it down, use your F pencil, and then trace the inside. Like that, and that'll give you your circle. So you don't have to use any fancy stuff, just use the inside. And then you'll freehand out your cast shadow. Like that, and then start shading, okay? Just make sure that when you do that inside, because you have some kind of template, typically if you use a ruler or you use any type of template, you press a little harder. So you wanna make sure you press light so that you can get that light edge, because remember the lines will eventually go away. So why are we doing this? In the past, what I've had people do is they just go right into graphite drawing, just an actual pencil drawing with shading. And then everybody's getting these crazy like fuzzy lines and like smudgy lines. And I'm like, okay, let's take it back a step and let me just teach you how to at least shade, and let's practice on a sphere, and let me have you practice at least getting 7 different values, technically 6 because 1 is paper. And then from there, taking that information and going into an actual applied still life.